My grandson called me at 11 at night, and I knew before I answered that something in our family had already broken. "Ethan, help me," he whispered, and the fear in his voice was a sound I had not heard since he was 6 years old and afraid of the dark. "Grandpa, I'm at the hospital. Aunt Denise says I hurt myself, but I didn't. I swear I didn't." Dad believes her. When I walked into that emergency room 40 minutes later, the security guard took one look at my badge from 30 years on the bench and said, "Sir, I think there's been a mistake here. I think you need to see this for yourself. If you're listening to this tonight, take a breath, because what I am about to tell you started as an ordinary Tuesday and ended as the most calculated act of cruelty I encountered in 3 decades, handing down sentences in Cook County. Never underestimate what a grandfather will do when the law fails his family, and never assume a quiet old man in a cardigan has nothing left to fight with. My name is Ethan Whitfield. I am 68 years old, a retired circuit court judge, and until that Tuesday night I believed my family was simply going through a hard patch. I was wrong about almost everything. Before I go further, tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. And if you've ever had to be the one person in your family who refused to look away, hit like and subscribe, because this story is for you. My life after the bench was supposed to be small and quiet. My wife, Margaret, died 6 years ago of a stroke that took her from me in a single afternoon. And after that, the house on Sycamore Lane felt too big for one man and his dog. What kept me tethered to the world was my son, Peter, and his boy, Caleb. Peter is a pediatric anesthesiologist, gentle in the way only men who spend their days calming frightened children can be gentle. I had raised him to notice suffering before it announced itself, and for most of his life he had. Caleb was 14, quiet, obsessed with building model airplanes in the garage, the kind of kid who apologized to furniture when he bumped into it. When Peter's first wife, Rachel, died of ovarian cancer 4 years back, Caleb and I grew close in the specific way that grief presses people together. I picked him up from school on Thursdays. I taught him to fish. I was, without ever saying the word out loud, doing half the job of a father while Peter tried to remember how to breathe again. Denise came into our lives 18 months ago. She worked in pharmaceutical sales, and she met Peter at a hospital conference in Scottsdale. She was 41, striking in the sharp, symmetrical way that made people stare a half-second too long, and she had a laugh that filled a room before you'd even heard the joke. I liked her at first. Everyone did. She brought Peter back to life in a way I had not managed to, and for that alone I was grateful. But there was something underneath her warmth that I noticed and dismissed. The way you notice a hairline crack in a foundation and tell yourself the house has stood for years. It will stand a few more. She and Peter married 8 months after they met. I told myself it was simply love, moving at the speed grief sometimes demands. The night everything changed. A cold front had rolled down from Wisconsin, and the wind was rattling the storm windows of my house. I was half asleep in my recliner, the television murmuring some documentary about glaciers, when my phone buzzed against the side table. I almost let it go to voicemail. I am grateful, more than I can say, that I did not. "Grandpa," Caleb said, and his voice was so thin I barely recognized it. "Please come. I'm at Lakeside Memorial. They think I did something to myself, but I didn't. Denise found me and she started screaming that I cut myself, and Dad believed her right away. He didn't even ask me first. He just believed her." I sat up so fast I knocked over the glass of water on the side table. "Slow down," I said, forcing my own voice into the calm I had spent 40 years cultivating for witness stands and terrified defendants. "Tell me exactly what happened. Where is your father right now?" "He's here," Caleb said, and I could hear the tremor traveling down through his teeth. "He's here, but he won't look at me, Grandpa. He keeps saying he's disappointed in me. Denise told the doctors I've been cutting myself for months and hiding it, and now they want to admit me somewhere, and I don't even know what's happening. I just want to go home." I did not ask another question. I told him to stay exactly where he was, that I was already reaching for my coat, and I hung up before he could hear the fury cracking through my composure. The drive to Lakeside Memorial should have taken 25 minutes. I made it in 14, my hands so tight on the wheel my knuckles ached long after I parked. Caleb did not have a self-destructive bone in his body. He flinched at the sight of blood in movies. The idea that he had been secretly harming himself for months was as absurd to me as the idea that my late wife had secretly been training for the Olympics. But it was the other detail that terrified me more than anything Denise could invent. Why was Peter, A man who had once sat vigil for 3 straight nights beside a dying stranger's child because no family had arrived yet, refusing to even look at his own son. I pushed through the sliding doors into the fluorescent churn of the emergency department, the air thick with antiseptic and the low static hum of monitors. A young security guard moved to intercept me, hand raised, telling me visiting hours for psychiatric holds were restricted and I'd need to check in at the desk and wait my turn like everyone else. I did not slow down. "My name is Ethan Whitfield," I told him, "and my grandson Caleb Whitfield is somewhere behind these doors, and I strongly suggest you find whoever is in charge before I find them myself." The guard's bravado lasted exactly as long as it took the charge nurse to overhear my name and go pale. "Judge Whitfield," she said, hurrying around the desk. "I didn't realize. I'm so sorry. I had no idea he was your grandson. Nobody told us to expect you." Her hands were shaking slightly as she reached for a clipboard she didn't need. "I want to see him right now," I said. "And I want someone to explain to me why a 14-year-old with no psychiatric history and a spotless record is sitting behind a locked door tonight instead of in his own bed." "Yes, sir, right this way," she said, and led me down a corridor lined with curtained bays, her sneakers squeaking against linoleum that smelled faintly of bleach. My stomach churned with a dread I recognized from decades of watching families receive news that would reshape the rest of their lives. "Room 6, she said quietly, "and your son and his wife are in the family consultation room just across the hall." I looked first through the narrow observation window of room 6, and what I saw made something in my chest crack open. Caleb was curled on the exam table with his knees drawn to his chest, a thin hospital blanket pulled around his thin shoulders, his glasses askew and fogged from crying. His left forearm was wrapped in gauze, 3 neat parallel lines of white bandage that made my stomach drop even though every instinct in me screamed that this boy had never lifted a blade against himself in his life. His eyes were red-rimmed and hollow, fixed on nothing, the particular stillness of a child who has stopped expecting anyone to believe him. I pressed my palm flat against the cold glass. I had spent 40 years sentencing men who hurt children for far less than what I was seeing on my own grandson's arm, and the fury that rose in me was old and familiar, the kind I had learned, painfully, to control before it controlled me. I made myself step back, made myself breathe, and crossed the hall to the consultation room. Through that window, the contrast hit me like a physical blow. There was no trembling child here. Denise sat upright in a padded chair. Mascara tracked artfully down one cheek in a single elegant line. A paper cup of untouched coffee cooling in her hands, playing the role of the shattered stepmother with the polish of someone who had rehearsed it. Every few seconds her eyes flicked toward the door, checking, measuring, before resuming her performance of grief. I had watched hundreds of witnesses lie under oath. I knew the difference between a person drowning in real anguish and a person keeping meticulous time. And beside her, in a folding chair that seemed to be the only thing keeping him upright, was my son. Peter looked like a man who had been poured out and left standing by habit alone. His color was wrong, a grayish pallor beneath the hospital lighting, his eyes half-lidded and unfocused, his big surgeon's hands trembling faintly in his lap. This was not a father in shock. This was a man who had been chemically hollowed out from the inside, and the horror of that realization nearly buckled my knees. When Denise let out a soft, theatrical sob, Peter's hand rose slowly, sluggishly, to pat her shoulder with the coordination of a man moving underwater. He did not look toward the door where his own son lay bandaged and terrified. He looked at nothing at all. A doctor I recognized, Dr. Alvarez, found me in the hallway, her expression grim with the particular exhaustion of someone who has delivered too many difficult conversations in one shift. "Judge Whitfield," she said quietly, "your daughter-in-law brought Caleb in, reporting she'd discovered him self-harming in the bathroom, 3 cuts on his left forearm, and stated this had likely been ongoing for months, hidden under long sleeves. She's requesting a 72-hour psychiatric hold pending transfer to an adolescent inpatient facility. Given his father's medical background, the attending is inclined to defer to the parent's judgment. I asked her for one thing only: 5 minutes alone with my grandson, as his legal guardian in the absence of his father's competent judgment. No staff present, no recording." She hesitated only a moment before nodding and unlocking the door. Caleb flinched at the sound, then broke into ragged sobs the instant he saw my face. "Grandpa," he choked out, and I crossed the small room in 2 strides and pulled him into my arms, careful of the bandaged arm, feeling his whole body shake against mine like something coming apart at the seams. "I'm here," I told him, my voice low and steady even as my heart hammered. "Nobody is taking you anywhere you don't belong. I promise you that." I held him until the worst of the shaking passed, until his breathing slowed enough that I could pull back and look into his swollen eyes. "I need the truth, Caleb," I said gently. "All of it. I know you didn't do this to yourself. Tell me what actually happened tonight." He took a shuddering breath, and the words came pouring out of him like something that had been dammed up for far too long. "She did it, Grandpa. Denise did it. I was in the garage working on my model plane, and she came out and started yelling at me for leaving glue on the workbench. And when I tried to explain it wasn't a big deal, she grabbed my arm and dragged me inside, and I got scared and pulled away, and I guess I scraped it on the corner of the door frame trying to get loose. Just a little scrape, I swear." And then she looked at it and got this weird, calm look on her face, and she went and got a first aid kit. And before I even understood what was happening, she'd made it into 3 lines with a razor blade from Dad's shaving kit, while I was still crying and telling her to stop, and I couldn't even see because I was crying so hard. And then she called 911 and told them I'd been secretly hurting myself for months, and she'd finally caught me. My blood went cold. This was not simply a lie. This was premeditation. A woman who had converted her own violence into evidence against the child she'd harmed, using medical precision to make it look self-inflicted. I asked him one more question, keeping my voice level though everything in me was shaking. "Caleb, has your father seemed different lately? Tired, confused, not himself?" Caleb's eyes filled again. "He's been so out of it for weeks, Grandpa. Denise makes him this special tea every night before bed. She says it's for his stress from work, and after he drinks it, he just gets weird and sleepy and forgets things. I tried to tell him something was wrong, but he just says I'm being dramatic." I felt the floor tilt slightly beneath me. 30 years of reading liars on a witness stand had taught me to trust the cold certainty settling into my chest. My son was being drugged, methodically, in his own home, by the woman he had married 8 months after meeting her. I told Caleb to stay put, that I would be back, and I left an off-duty officer I recognized from the courthouse posted outside his door before crossing back into the consultation room. Denise's posture shifted the instant I entered, sorrow sliding smoothly into performance for a fresh audience. "Ethan," she said, rising as if to embrace me. "Thank God you're here. I don't know how much more of this I can handle." I held up a hand and let silence fill the space where sympathy was supposed to go. I had learned decades ago that liars cannot tolerate silence. It forces them to keep talking, to keep building, until the structure of their story finally shows its cracks. She filled it exactly as I expected. "William," she began, before catching herself. "Ethan, I'm sorry. I'm just so shaken. You have to understand what these past months have been like. Caleb has been struggling since his mother passed, and it's gotten so much worse lately. Secretive, withdrawn, and then tonight I found him in the bathroom and there was blood everywhere. And when I tried to help him, he became almost violent, hysterical, screaming that I was the one who hurt him, which is, frankly, the sickest part of all this." She glanced at Peter for confirmation, and my son, my brilliant son who had once diagnosed a rare cardiac anomaly in a toddler from a single flicker on a monitor, nodded slowly, mechanically, and murmured, "It's true, Dad. He's not himself anymore. We've been so worried." I looked at her without blinking. "And the tea," I said. "What's in the tea you've been making Peter every night?" Something flickered behind her eyes, gone almost before I caught it, but I had spent a lifetime catching exactly that flicker in men far more dangerous than she looked. "Just chamomile," she said, her smile tightening at the corners. "Something to help him sleep. He's been under so much stress at the hospital." I let the silence stretch again, longer this time, until I watched her hands tighten almost imperceptibly around the paper cup. "I have spent 40 years, I told her quietly, "listening to people explain away things that don't need explaining unless they're hiding something. You don't defend chamomile tea like it's on trial, Denise, unless some part of you already knows it is." Her mask did not fully slip, but something underneath it shifted, a recalibration. The look of a predator realizing the prey in front of her was not the one she'd planned for. I turned to my son and crouched slightly to meet his half-focused gaze. "Peter," I said softly, "do you hear what's happening right now? Do you understand that your son is lying in a hospital bed with your wife's fabricated evidence wrapped around his arm?" Peter's brow furrowed with visible effort, as though my words had to travel through fog to reach him. "Dad," he said, his voice thick and slurred at the edges, "you don't understand what it's been like. Caleb's not okay. He needs help. We were going to get him admitted somewhere good, somewhere they could actually treat him, starting Thursday." Denise found a place upstate, really excellent reputation, residential, long-term. The words hit me like a fist to the sternum. Long-term, residential. They intended to commit a perfectly healthy, grieving 14-year-old boy to a psychiatric facility on the strength of wounds his own stepmother had carved into his arm. And they intended to do it in 2 days, before anyone could stop them, before the drugged fog clouding my son's judgment had any chance to lift. Once a minor is committed under a parent's authority, unwinding that decision becomes a legal labyrinth that can swallow months, sometimes years, and in that time Caleb would be filled with medications he did not need for a condition he did not have, and something essential in him might never fully recover. I straightened and let 4 decades of courtroom authority settle into my spine. "Listen to me very carefully," I said, my voice dropping into the register I had once used to silence entire courtrooms with a single sentence. "Caleb is coming home with me tonight. He will stay in my custody while I have every test in this hospital run on my son's blood, and while I have a forensic nurse examine every inch of those wounds on my grandson's arm, because I promise you both, the physical evidence does not lie the way people do." Denise's composure cracked for just a fraction of a second, a flash of something cold and calculating before the wounded wife mask slammed back into place. "You can't just take him," she said, her voice sharpening. "I'm his legal stepmother. I have rights here." "You have exactly as many rights as a court allows you," I said, "and I intend to remind this hospital, in writing, within the hour, exactly how many that is." I found Dr. Alvarez in the hallway and requested, formally, as Caleb's grandfather and an officer of the court, a full toxicology screen on my son, and a forensic wound assessment on my grandson before any discharge or transfer paperwork moved forward. She agreed without hesitation once I explained what Caleb had told me, her expression hardening into the particular focus of a physician who has just realized she nearly missed something catastrophic. Within the hour, a forensic nurse examined Caleb's arm under bright clinical light and confirmed what my gut had already told me. The wounds were too uniform, too evenly spaced, inconsistent with the frantic, irregular pattern of genuine self-harm, and entirely consistent with being made by another hand while the subject struggled. Photographs were taken. A report was filed. I stood in the corridor and felt something in my chest loosen for the first time in hours. The toxicology results took 2 days, the longest 2 days of my life, during which I kept Caleb close, fed him pancakes he barely touched, and sat up most nights listening to him finally sleep without flinching. When the results came back, they confirmed a slow, deliberate accumulation of a sedative in Peter's system. Not enough at any single dose to kill him, but enough, sustained over weeks, to erode his judgment, his memory, his ability to notice that the woman pouring his tea each night was systematically dismantling his relationship with his own child. It was not an accident. It was a campaign. What came out over the following weeks, through the police investigation I insisted on, and the private detective I hired within days, was worse than I had imagined and, in its own way, simpler. Denise was drowning in debt from a failed business 2 states away, debt she had hidden from Peter entirely. Peter's late wife, Rachel, had left a trust for Caleb that would fully vest when he turned 18, administered until then by Peter, and Peter's own assets, home, and life insurance named Caleb as primary beneficiary. Denise's plan, patient and cruel in equal measure, was never simply to marry into money. It was to have Caleb declared unstable, institutionalized, his testimony and judgment permanently discredited in any future proceeding, while she slowly incapacitated Peter enough to gain control of finances he could no longer track clearly himself. A troubled, medicated stepson in a facility upstate cannot contest a guardianship filing. A father, clouded by sedatives, cannot notice his signature on documents he doesn't remember agreeing to. Peter's recovery, once the sedatives cleared his system over the following weeks, was its own kind of devastating. I watched my son's face when I finally told him everything, watched 31 years of medical training collide with the horror of realizing he had nearly signed away his own child's freedom while poisoned by the woman sleeping beside him. He did not speak for a long time. Then he asked to see Caleb, and when Caleb walked into the room, still wary, still flinching slightly at sudden movement, Peter dropped to his knees in front of his son and simply said, "I am so sorry. I believed the wrong person, and I will spend the rest of my life making that right." It was not a scene from a courtroom. It was better than anything I had ever witnessed from a bench. Denise was arrested 3 weeks later, charged with aggravated assault of a minor, fabrication of evidence, and administering a controlled substance without consent. Among other counts, my old colleagues assured me would keep prosecutors busy for months. She did not go quietly. She hired the best attorney her remaining money could reach and painted herself, right up until the toxicology and forensic reports were entered into evidence, as a grieving, misunderstood stepmother persecuted by a vindictive old judge who never liked her. The jury did not agree. Neither, in the end, did the evidence. Caleb is 15 now. He still builds model airplanes in my garage most weekends, though the tremor in his hands took months to fully settle. He does not talk about that night often, but when he does, it is usually to tell me, with the plain honesty of a boy who has learned exactly how much his own words are worth, that he is glad someone finally believed him the first time he said it. Peter calls me every single day now, sometimes just to say nothing important at all, and I have come to understand that those calls, the small, ordinary ones, are worth more to me than any verdict I ever handed down in 40 years on the bench. There was a stretch of years, after Margaret died, when my house grew quiet and I told myself that was simply what happened to old men, that our children grow busy and our grandchildren grow up and the phone stops ringing the way it used to. I know now that silence in a family is not always simple distance. Sometimes it is a door someone else has quietly locked, and it is still worth walking down that hallway to open it, no matter how many years it has been since anyone thought to ask you to.